Primer has changed a lot, and you've been involved with a lot of those changes. So I'm going to just throw out some programs, projects, different elements of Primer, and if you could say
Sure.
a few words or a few sentences or paragraphs about each. Arena. Talk to me about Arena, please.
Arena was for me a gift from heaven. That's all I can say. And I think it was, again, it was not only a community, but it was a community of administrators, and it was Arena and Primer that made the voice of administrators important, right from the start. It was always, the voice. And it was also then through Arena that I think the whole field of what I'm doing has been professionalized. If it was not for Arena, if it was not for Primer, we would not have that professionalization. And so when I say it was a gift from heaven, it was really a gift to me and to many other people, and the recognition of that. I mean, as we've gone on, and this has been recognized, it's very easy to sort of integrate that. There is no Arena anymore, but the importance, the field has grown, the professional has been grown, it's been recognized, and it's been integrated. But in early years, that wasn't the case, because a lot of people who did research administration, I mean, it was the administrator for the chair, it was just anyone who happened to do that, and so there was no voice or professionalism there. And so that's what, Arena. I was very, I remember when you asked me to, I remember going to, Arena things, listening to the talks, and I really liked them because they were really like hands-on basic. I mean, I got the most out of those things in the early years. And I remember you asking me to be a regional representative. And, I remember saying, no, I don't think I can do this. And then, you sort of prodded me along, or other people did, and then I did it. And then I remember when you asked me to run for office, that was very difficult. And I have to say, if you didn't keep prodding me, I probably would not have done it, because I just felt like, who the heck, I can't do this. But it was probably the best thing that ever, happened to me. And I thank, you and Primer for that opportunity. It was through that I got to know the board members. I remember being so nervous, because as an Arena president, you would have to come into the board meeting, I think, at a certain point. And I would be so nervous, who are those board members, and am I going to say anything that's useful? So yeah, I think it certainly served me. I think it served a role in the profession for the time it did. I think there are other ways that we're all recognizing and accommodating that, but it was just phenomenal. And I think its legacy will live on forever and ever, and it's now part of Primer, and there are other ways that we can, satisfy those same needs for new administrators and for everyone.
You were also one of the midwives of our certification program for IRB administrators and anyone else seeking credential. Would you please talk about the early days and years of CCIP and the CIP credential?
So that happened when I was involved in the leadership of Arena, and it was a natural outgrowth of that. And it was also, in the heels of, thinking about shutdowns and professionalization. And I remember sort of thinking, well, why don't we think about some type of certification, program? And so when we were, with Arena, and so I remember we said, well, who do we want to think about it? And so, Gary Chadwick and I and many others, we decided on behalf of leadership of Arena to sort of, think about this. We got some people together that we knew and liked and thought were smart. And, we were able to do it. I mean, Primer and Arena let us do it. When you sort of think about it, it was sort of like this bold move. And I remember talking to the board at the time, and I remember the board sort of questioning a lot now about, is this the right thing to do? And I remember having to defend it, to the board, the need. And it didn't go over, really well initially, but I think eventually people sort of recognized it and certainly allowed us to do it and help and funded it and whatever. So, once that happened, then it was, okay, well, how do we do this? And I, remember contracting with, the organization that was helping us with the testing, and learning to write test questions. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was a lot of fun in the beginning, never thinking that it was going to take. I mean, we all hoped it would take off, but never thinking that it would take off to the extent that it did. And I remember the first exam when it was given. I remember talking to people as they came out of the exam. How was it? How was it? What did you think of the questions? And maybe that's because we were all involved in writing the test questions. We wanted to know what people, thought about it. But never in my wildest dreams thought that it would take off the way it did. Remember seeing jobs now, CIP certification required or willingness to serve for CIP certification. It's just amazing. And I think this, again, is part of the professionalization of the field. And I'm so happy that it happened and was glad that, we could plant a seed and it grew. And it flourished and continues and has spilled over to the animal community. So it's amazing to think about it.
Another premier program with which you've been very centrally involved is our At Your Doorstep and On the Road program. And I wonder if you talk about what it's like to go out to areas that might not have the ability to come to conferences, or at least as many conferences, or deal with colleagues as much as those of you in larger cities. What that experience has been like for you, and taking education to other institutions.
Taking education to other institutions has been a very exciting and learning opportunity. And I think everyone who goes out as faculty comes back with as much information as at least I come back with as much information as I hope to give people as well. When we did At the Doorstep program, there were years that this was a mandated thing. So institutions, and I can remember doing it at institutions where, we would do 5 in a couple days, half day things, and they, the faculty would just come in and out, and you're just like, oh my goodness. And we used to want to know whether it was mandated or whether people wanted to be there. So I can remember, those years, and it was satisfying even if 1 or 2 people said, oh, this was better than I thought. I mean, that was like, okay, we accomplished something. Generally, that's not the majority of places that we've been to. And what I have always appreciated and learned about doing it is that different places have different cultures and different ways of doing things. And especially if you go to a place where it's mixed, where you have administrators, where you have investigators, where you have IRB members, and you can easily do that in a small group when you're at the doorstep someplace, especially if a university or hospital asks you to do it. It's such an opportunity to teach, but it's also an opportunity for people to talk and hear each other. And that has always struck me. Just getting those people in the room from that community, from that hospital, from that group of hospitals in a regional area, and having people teach each other and talk. And you almost feel like you're just there enabling that discussion to take place. And I think that that's been very, very useful for the places that we've gone to. I mean, I think I've learned, and I always start when I teach that when I talk about Primer and being there, I also say that I'm looking forward to bringing back what I can learn from them. And there hasn't been one place that's let me down with what I've learned about some practice, some issue, some way of looking at things, some communication. So, it's changed as we've been able to do it. The one thing that has struck me about all of the teaching, whatever, which is a very good thing, is how sophisticated people have gotten and what they want to know. Where, we used to, if we covered the basics, that was a lot of education for people. But now you go out to places and, they really, the questions that come at you and what you try and have to teach them are very significant, very complex, make me think. And that's where I'm doing some of the learning now, because I don't have all of the answers. And a lot of times when people ask me questions at these regional things, I know that there are a lot of smart people in the room. That's why they're there. They're motivated. So, I mean, I have an idea of an answer, but I will also throw it out to the group. Well, let's open this up to the group and let's discuss this. And that's where I learn and people learn as well. So it's been a great opportunity to get to know people, parts of the country, um, and and really have great discussions.
You have also been a member of a number of national advisory groups and panels, and I'd love to hear about some of those activities and your experiences with each. So, shall we start with the most current, with SACCARP, or your pleasure? We could start with some of the earlier ones.
Sure. So right now, I'm not on the SACCARP committee. I'm on one of the advisory committees. Um, the predecessor to SACCARP was NERPAC. And so I think I'm the only person who has continuously, I was on NERPAC, then went on to SACCARP, and now am still on a subcommittee. So I think I've been on, ever since OHRP has had an advisory committee, I have somehow been involved in that. Sometimes I ask myself why, but I have stayed involved. So currently I'm on the Secretary's Advisory Committee for Subpart A, the subcommittee. And I have to say that the way that SACCARP operates now, which is a little bit different than NERPAC and in the past, is that the subcommittees really do the meat of the work. They do the thinking. They bring proposals and ideas to the committee. But in Subpart A, it's the people who are in the thick of it, who live, sleep, eat, deal with these issues and the regulations every day. So, I feel that it's important to continue to contribute. I think one of the frustrating parts for me and for others as well is we spend a lot of time on different recommendations that make it through, and then we wonder what happens to that. And that's frustrating. It's been frustrating enough that I know that some other individuals have decided to step off the committees because they are frustrated with that. I just feel like if I do this long enough and stick with it, there's going to be something that's going to make it through and make me feel like, okay, it was worth putting in this effort. So, and serving previous to that as a SACCARP member was a great opportunity. There I worked with Celia Fisher when she was on the committee, and we had a subcommittee on pediatrics, and we actually did a report on pediatrics, which is very consistent to the work that I had done on NERPAC with pediatrics, and is also very consistent with the work that I did on the Institute of Medicine committee. And so that's the real frustrating thing, is that there's been a history of pretty consistent recommendations to help institutions interpret and utilize and think about the pediatric regulations. And yet we haven't seen something officially released from OHRP yet. People use that guidance. I mean, I often say, how many advisory committees do you need before you see something implemented, especially when they're consistent? If they were all over the place, but it's been 3 separate groups that have consistently come up, and with very with the ION committee, this was not a government committee. They went after the big thinkers, the best thinkers, some independent people, and yet we all have come up with the same thing. So that's frustrating, but not frustrating enough. I still have hope that eventually those will see the light of day, and so that's with SACCARP, and also my experience with the Institute of Medicine committee was a great committee to work with. They know how to do things right. They have the finances to do it. They have writers. They have people that go do research for you, bring it in, you discuss things, you come up with recommendations. So that was a great experience. And every IRB member that I trained on our committee gets the Institute of Medicine book and report, not so much for the recommendations, but it's the best sort of source of information on the different issues and training someone to think about, because they did so much research and put so much in there that it's just a great resource for pediatric research.
So, if you were to summarize what makes it so terrific, what are some of the key points or most enduring recommendations, just for posterity? I'd be very grateful.
Sure. So much around pediatric research deals with the concept of minimal risk. I mean, that's the extra protection where, as an adult, I can say to you, Joan, we want to do this research. There's going to be risk to it. You're not going to benefit by it. But do you want to do it? And you can, as a competent, if you're a competent adult, say, yeah, I want to do this for altruistic reasons. And in pediatrics, we can't do that. So that's sort of the stoplight. And so we have this threshold of minimal risk. And the recommendations, when we went through some of the recommendations, looked at how we think about minimal risk. And it also went through some of the regulations for when you want to do research that's greater than minimal risk and there's no prospect of direct benefit. It's not that you can't do it in pediatrics, it's just the hurdle to allow you to do that is much greater. And this is important research. This is sometimes research that needs to be done. This is a lot of physiology or endocrinology, or how normal children metabolize something. You need to use normal children. So it's not that this is unethical research to do, but there is a regulatory framework to do it. In the committees that looked at this, there are 4 criteria that need to be satisfied in order to subject a child to greater than minimal risk with no benefit. And those are very vague. So one is that it has to be a minor increase over minimal risk. Well, what does that mean? How does one IRB interpret that? And so the committees that I worked with put some parameters around it. It's transient, it's reversible. I mean, the regs don't say that, but to help an IRB think, if you're going to put someone at a more than minimal risk research, what does that mean? Is that here? Minimal risk is here. Is that here, or is that here? Okay, so putting some, and then there are other things, that that we give that have been given guidance on those different criteria. Thinking about, for example, one of the criteria is that it has to be of vital importance of understanding the disease or the condition. So what is condition? If a child is premature, is that a condition? Is that something? I think we think of conditions and diseases or whatever. We've had the discussions, is normalcy a condition? It's a slippery slope and you have to be careful. But the different committees have come up with certain recommendations to help that I think are, again, pretty sound, that still protect children but allow important research to go forward. You have to remember, I work in a community where we don't have a lot of information on children because children were very much protected. And so you want to be able to do research on children. You don't want to expose them to significant risks and whatever, but you want to be able to do it. And so I think the committees really struggled with, how do you allow and promote and be able to learn things about children, but still have protections in place. And it's very hard to just read the regs and come up with what that means. And IRBs are all over the place with that. So I don't think we should dictate what the determination finally is if multiple IRBs reviewed something, but to help them, give them the tools about how they think about that. And that's what I think a lot of these recommendations had in there, which I wish would just get out there. A lot of institutions are using them anyway, but it hasn't been, officially endorsed.
Thank you. You referred earlier to the fact that you had been an OHRP site visitor during one of the pre-shutdown visits. And you've served on an IOM committee, and you've provided testimony to the FDA. And I wonder if you'd characterize for the record how you perceive the relationship among the regulatory agencies, the community of regulated institutions, some of the non-governmental, nonprofit organizations such as Primer, since you've had so much direct experience with all.
I think it's gotten better. I don't think it's perfect. I think I may have experiences with people in the regulated community that are not typical of other people because I have worked with them in other ways. So, I feel personally my relationship in the ability to call, to get questions answered, to not be afraid to do that. I'm very comfortable with that because of, because what I've been able to do. That's not typical for the majority of people who are working in the community. And so I think that people are fearful of doing that. And I think that that's wrong. I think that over the years, there has been an attempt, at least OHRP, to want to work with the community. I mean, there's the old joke, you don't call OHRP if you're not prepared for the answer. And I think that's still very true. And just last week advised someone that, like, do you really want to call and get the answer? Because once you get the answer, you got to live by it. So if there's some room for some interpretation here, which I think there is, you want to think about doing that. So there is that part, but I think that, people shouldn't be fearful of that. I think some of the agencies are easier to work with than others. I think there's been a lot of attempt to put more guidance out for the community, which I think is good to do that. I think one of the things that I have often thought about with Primer specifically is they've served as sort of the perfect middle person. They've served as the convener so that if you or your organization doesn't necessarily feel comfortable complaining, getting information, that there's a group in the Primer meetings and whatever in the Primer efforts that can help with facilitating that and can help bring down those barriers in an open place that can be effective and beneficial. I mean, I think one of the things that I've seen in working with regulators, and it may be individuals, but I'm saying in general, is we all live in our own worlds, and it's always really important to have another perspective. We think we understand. We look at things through our own rose-colored glasses, and it's so important to get the input of how something that they may be thinking about, impacts people in the real world. And for us to get the understanding of why they feel it's important. If they're thinking of a new policy or what is it that has prompted them to think that there's a problem out there? And so I think that open communication with the regulators and the agencies is really important. It's hard to achieve that when you are being regulated and you are being inspected by the FDA and you are being investigated by OHRP or there's some type of complaint. But that doesn't happen all the time. And outside of those times, I think the more that we can interact, integrate, and find places to do that, such as Primer, the more important it is and the more beneficial it is for everyone.
Thank you. So many people consider you to be a role model and a mentor. And I wonder if you could talk about what qualities you consider to be important when serving as a mentor.
Sure. Well, I think first of all, I love serving as a mentor. There's absolutely nothing that gives me more pleasure than to watch someone grow, to be excited. I think part of being a mentor for me is to get people excited about this. It isn't for everyone, but for me, this is more than just a job. You know, people tell me, Susan, you're one of the only people that I really know that loves your job. You know, why are you reading that journal when you're on the beach? You know, and I think there are a lot of people I think this field um, attracts people like that. For a lot of us, it is more than just a job. And so I think when I mentor someone, if they have that instinct or that feeling or that desire, I go with it with them. I say, embrace it. Use it. Do that. I'll often tell people, like in my office or other places, that you're going to get in your work. You're going to have to accomplish certain types of things, and that sometimes, if you're really interested, you're going to have to put in your own time to do that, and your own interest, and that's fine. I mean, I always believe in a work-life balance. My family comes first. I mean, that's number one. But I think in being a mentor that I can instill that excitement. Now, not everyone gets real excited, and you can still mentor them. That's not saying you can't. That's the best person to mentor, to see that drive, that desire, that fire, and that ready, set, go, and they go with it. But others in mentors, I think one of the things that I think is really, really important is I just think in this whole field, open-mindedness and flexibility. And that's like the number two thing. Besides that excitement, I think that's the number two thing that I try and work with, with someone to, and I live this every day. Just when you think there's nothing, you think, what other issue could come up? I've been doing this for 30 years. What other ethical issue could be there? We're going to start repeating. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And just because you thought about something similar 20 years ago and found a way to solve that, you can't automatically take that and use that going forward, because things are different. Society's different. There's always something different. And so I think in mentoring people, you need to sort of understand and recognize and feel comfortable with that, because sometimes that's not a comfortable place to feel. Sometimes you want to say, saw that, solved it, did it, we're going to do the same. But it doesn't happen that way. Science changes, our society's expectation changes, our patient population changes, our research subject changes, our infrastructure changes, our regulators change. And so you need to, do that. So that open-mindedness, the flexibility, the knowledge part, I mean, anyone can do that. Anyone can do that. And so, I think part of the third thing I would say about mentoring is confidence. People having the confidence to sort of understand. And so, part of the way I mentor is when people come to me with questions, I turn the question right back to them and say, how would you answer that? Think about it. Where would you go? And most of the time, they're 97, 98, 99% there. It's just giving them the confidence that they've thought about the right things. And this isn't black and white, so it's not a fact that they have to remember. It's conceptually thinking about a lot of different things. And so trying to instill that confidence. And I always say, when I train someone or bring someone in the office, I mean, I mentor in many ways, but people in my own office, I'll say the first 6 months, you're going to say to yourself, what the heck am I doing? This makes absolutely no sense. The next 6 months, you're going to start saying, oh, I think I get it. And then 6 months, you'll be okay. And then you'll start seeing they're not confident. It happens all the time. They're just not confident. And that's when you really start getting to the point where you've got to make them feel confident. And that's mentoring. That's mentoring, not giving people knowledge. You can go to the regs.
Who were some of your role models and mentors in your work?
Certainly a lot. I would say that probably the IRB chair, who I started with, who was chair for 35 years, up until recently, about 5 years ago, and he's much older now, Peter Wolf. I have to say that he definitely was a mentor in some ways. He wouldn't mind if I said he chaired an IRB and had no tolerance for the regulations. And I don't think he would mind that and would be proud of that, because he was about ethics. He was about ethics. And I sort of felt that my role was to bring the regs along the ethics piece. And most of the time, they jive real nice, which they should. There were a couple times that they, you would lead a decision one way ethically, and regulatory, you'd have to say, maybe we need to, modify that. But that desire and appreciation of doing the right thing and letting that drive you, and then figuring out the regs part secondary. So I think that was an important, mentoring me sort of professionally in the way, I think about things. So I have to give him, lots of credit, for doing that. And then I have a lot of mentors, a lot of my colleagues that I've been working with for years in the early years. I look up to, to all of them, and I don't want to give names because I will definitely forget them, and I don't want to insult people. But, I feel like we struggled through things together. We understood, and they're just so wise people. And there are other people that get excited about this, get excited about teaching, get excited about mentoring, get excited about the field, spend time outside of work, thinking of things, doing things. So that's been a many role models and mentors, to me.
I have 3 more questions before we end this segment. And one of them is about the difficulty of persuading or compelling investigators to get ethics education. Henry Beecher's famous quote that the best hedge or the best protection for subjects is a capable and competent and caring and intelligent investigator. I got the adjectives wrong. But, how have you managed to so successfully educate the investigators at your institution, and what advice would you give to those who are not as effective as you have been in that regard?
You can ask them whether I've been effective or not, but hopefully I have. Well, I think the way that I've learned to help, educate is, again, to explain not what needs to be done, but why, and to live by bringing it back to the ethics piece. At least my experience, researchers want to be ethical. They want to do the right things. They go into things with a bias. They go into things looking at things. They don't consider those things because they're looking at science and methodology and how to get things done. So I think this idea of collaboration is important. But I also think it's really important with research in so many different fields and disciplines to bring the education to be specific, not vague, but to be specific how it impacts research and ethics in their discipline. The way I would work with a geneticist is very different than the way I would work with a surgeon, is very different than the way I would work with a cardiologist. And so in education, one of the things that, that I've done, which is time consuming, is first of all, to bring the education to them. So what does that mean? Well, we all use the city, type of stuff, and that's general for everyone. But that to me is sort of icing on the cake. That to me is not the real education. But so example of what I've done is there are times when I will ask to be invited to faculty meetings for every department. Now there are 35 of them, and I'm exhausted by the end, and I'm there at 6 a.m. with the anesthesiologist and whatever. But the issue is, you go to them at a time that they're there. It's not something extra. And then you tailor that to issues that impact them. And it's much more meaningful. So in surgery, this whole issue of what's research, what's surgery, what's innovation, whatever. I mean, that's an interesting discussion. and to help educate, help them and from, me to learn. When you go to genetics or whatever, we're talking about specimens, repositories, incidental findings. What are the issues in thinking about them? Now, there's so much cross-disciplinary research that everyone can always benefit, but to sort of educate and help people sort of understand if there are a couple key messages that you can give, that's important. The other thing that I like to do for education, everyone likes to learn from someone else's mistake, right? You don't want to make the same mistake. So when a mistake is made, when we have a problem, an issue, something that's reported, something that went wrong, my first reaction is, why did it happen? And if it happened to this one person, could it have happened to others? And most of the times it very easily could, because unless it's really a bad person, an intentional thing, most things are lack of education, lack of understanding, lack of knowing, lack of whatever you need to do. So when something like that happens, what I do is I turn that into something positive. And I work with the investigator to turn that into something positive. So I say to them, it's unfortunate, we had to do this, whatever remedy. Let's help teach your colleagues how to avoid this. Let's use this as an example. I often will suggest, you know how in a hospital you do M&M, morbidity and mortality. When something goes wrong, everyone gets together and they talk about what went wrong, why, and how to correct it. Why don't we do that with issues that may have gone awry in sort of the research context? And I've actually been asked to go to times when they've actually done that, where they've brought up the issue, have not mentioned who the investigator is, just say there was someone in the department and this is what happened, and let's learn from this, let's discuss, whatever. And there are other times where the investigator clearly has gotten up in front of his colleagues and said, folks, I blew it, I lived through it, I learned, let's talk about it. So those are some ways that you don't think about education. How can you think about non-compliance or something that went wrong as education? To me, that's like the perfect. Get through it, deal with it. They're not all pleasant, but utilize that. We had a whole bunch of series of all kinds of problems with breaches of confidentiality. Unintentional. Laptops being lost, encryption, cameras being stolen with pictures of research subjects for things that someone forgot to take the film on. And they came boom, boom, boom. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? We actually did a newsletter. I took all of those examples. I didn't mention the investigators. And did a newsletter to investigators. Hey, folks, are you aware that these 5 things happened within the last 6 months here? Wake up. Let's try and prevent it. Let's teach. Let's use this as a teachable moment. That's meaningful education. That's the way I like to think about education. Yeah, we do the city, we do the other types of things. We have to do it. We have refresher courses, those types of things. But there has to be something much closer to the researchers that they can really resonate with.
If someone who's just entering the field, as you were 30 years ago, were to come to you and say, teach me the standing on one foot essentials of being not just a competent, but a caring and wise and effective IRB professional, what would be the however many commandments or wishes on the wish list that you tell them?
Okay, so some of them I've gone over. So what would I say? Well, it's almost like what I look for when I hire people, sort of traits and things that I think I want to, do. I would say to them, I think you really need to appreciate and understand the importance of research, number one. I mean, I don't think you can do this or want to do that if you don't really believe in research. And it can be any kind of research, because that's the most important value, because that's what you're there to help facilitate in your own way. So you need to do that. I think the open-mindedness and flexibility is very, very important. And I always tell people that if there are many people in our world who are just black and white, and that's what they do best with. And if that's the type of person you are, you're not going to do well in the field, and you probably shouldn't try. And I'd be very upfront about that. The other thing I tell people, at least in being an IRB administrator and being very all geared towards service orientation, because we do service, we are colleagues, but we do service, is that if you're the type of person, and I think this is anyone who works in an IRB, who likes to come to work with a list of 10 different things that you want to get accomplished in a day, and you're really frustrated if you don't, find another job. This is not the job for you as well, because that's not what's going to happen. You're going to have a lot of, if you're doing your job well, people are going to want to come and see you. They're going to want to interrupt you. You're going to want to be accessible. People call my office and I pick up the phone and they say, can we set up a time to talk? And I'm like, well, why don't we talk now? That's like, that goes like, that's like 100 brownie points or whatever. But it's that willingness, that flexibility, that accessibility. So, and if you go in your office and shut your door and say, don't bother me, I'm going to get my 10 things done, you're not going to be successful in the field. So these are also things, outside of the knowledge type of thing, but that would be very, very, important. I strive for an open door policy for staff, for investigators, for anyone. Sometimes, I gotta shut it or I gotta go home and work for a day, but that's what I do. So, and I think you need to, have an appreciation of ethics. I did not learn really formally about ethics, but the type of person who strives to think about what the right thing to do is, and that's not always the most obvious and instinctive thing. You can't in the field just jump to a conclusion. Sometimes you'll read a protocol, you'll hear about a situation, and your gut will just say, of course this is what you do. And you can't necessarily always act on that. You got to pull yourself back and think about it and think about different ways. And that may, in the end, be what you're going to do and what you're going to recommend, but you can't just act by instinct. And sometimes that's hard to do because you have your own values in ethics and your own way of looking at something and the own way you would want to think about it. And that necessarily is not necessarily the way everyone else would. And that's sort of something that's hard in our field, is that we're trying to make decisions for the best decisions we can think about for a group of people, knowing that individuals may view things very, very differently. I often think, I sit on the hospital ethics committee, and I hear some heart-wrenching situations, but in some ways they're easier because it's about a family, a patient, a value system that you can learn about, a physician, and you're struggling with what the right decision, but you have information about individuals to help guide you. This family values this, or that patient values that. So that sort of helps inform you thinking about what is the appropriate thing to think about. When we're working within research, there are many people who are going to be approached with many values, with many ways of thinking of things, so that someone might say, this is wonderful, and someone might say, this is horrible, yet we need to come to the best decision for a group of people who are going to be approached or participate. That's hard. That's hard. That's hard to do. That's much harder than sometimes these ethics committee consults on a very unique individual situation. And so when I'm thinking about people coming into the field, that's why I'm saying you don't want to have a gut reaction, because that's one person's reaction. That's what an IRB is, right? That's why you bring it to an IRB, the hard stuff, so that you don't have one person.
The field is changing. The research world is changing. The IRB world is changing. What issues are on your worry list? What concerns you about the direction in which the field is going?
I don't know if it's what concerns me. It's certainly what challenges me. I mean, we are such a data-driven, information-seeking society now. We just get so much information and data, and it impinges things like how we think about confidentiality, how we think about privacy, how do we think about incidental findings, who wants them, who doesn't want them, what that means for ourselves, for our children, for our society. I mean, these are some huge issues that I find are the most difficult right now to think about, and I do worry about it. I do worry about it in the sense I really see differences in generations. I mean, we've always had differences in generations, but it sometimes worries me when I sit around a room and IRB people and I sort of look at the average age of the room and what we're thinking, and then thinking there's a whole generation that we're involving in the research that thinks very, very differently about this. And that worries me. And I don't know whether it's more or less some of these generational differences or what we're doing than before. I'm sure there were other things, prior to this. But, as a society, how we're gonna sort of think about those things in research. And I also worry that the balance of good research, I see it now. Everyone who comes to the hospital has to do research. Every resident, everyone, and that's great. But I worry about sometimes the quality of that research and the demands that are placed on people to do research in order to satisfy whatever program, fellowship, or whatever they're doing. And it may be minimal risk research, it may, but it's still, it worries me. And it's not so much an IRB issue, although there certainly is the science of an IRB review, but what are we going to do is, you hear a report one day, this vitamin's good for you, this vitamin's bad. I mean, it's probably always there, but it's just, there's so much of it now. And how we as a society are going to help deal with that and deal with that ethically. And, these are concerns outside of, just the IRB world. The quality of research is, concerns me.
Thank you, Susan. It has been a complete and total honor to talk with you, to hear from you. And
Thank you.
I just want to thank you for everything you've done for the field and for so many of us in it.
Thank you. It was an honor.